For the last 10 years, the notions of a green economy has become increasingly attractive to policymakers. However, green economy covers a lot of diverse concepts, and its link with sustainability are not always clear. In this video, we are going to know what is actually green economy and what Malaysia do to achieve it. Green economy. It is actually an economy that focusing on investing green economic activities, infrastructure, and skills, while circular economy is a simple model of the process of flows, which includes components, raw materials, and products that lose their value as little as possible. The aim is to design systems and business models in order to retain the maximum value of resources through the efficient management of materials and products, in particular by reducing waste and maximizing reusing, remanufacturing, and recycling of materials. In developing a sustainable economy, it requires designing sustainable and effective processes, systems, assets, and facilities. For example, one of the most famous company in Malaysia, which is Petronas, they have an LNG plant in Pengerang, Johor. This company produces natural gases and they refine them. So in order to refine, it requires extensive usage of energy and water resources. So they resolve this issue to continue the production by reducing energy and water consumption. In order to do it is by reusing the wastewater via the water treatment plant and converting it into a stream of carbon dioxide to the power supply. When we talk about the green economy, it is closely related to green GDP. But what is green GDP? The green gross domestic product is an index of economic growth with the environmental consequences of that growth factored into a country's conventional GDP. Green GDP can be computed by deducting the traditional GDP with natural resources depletion and pollution damage. The rules that we have to know about green GDP is, if the gap between traditional and green GDP is increased, it means that the natural capital depletion and pollution damage are also increased. To have a better picture of green GDP for Malaysia, let us see the graph that shows the comparison of traditional and green GDP in Malaysia from 1987 until 2011. From graphs, we can see that the green GDP runs almost parallel to the traditional GDP and a slightly lower rate of change until 2001. After that, the gap between traditional and green GDP growth becomes wider. It means that natural capital depletion and pollution damage are increased. Even the trends of green GDP is lower than the real GDP, we still can say that the economy of Malaysia is operating on the sustainable pathway. It is because the annual growth rates of green GDP and real GDP is positive and almost the same.
Now, let's talk about the issues. So, when we want to talk about something, of course there are some issues that come along. The issues that we found while we are doing some research for the topic Green and Circular Economy in Malaysia are the high carbon emission, lack of understanding, and the expensive cost. To begin with, let's talk about the issues that make it difficult for Malaysia to achieve a green economy, which is the high carbon emission produced by various industries. The Malaysian Department of Environment (MDOE) had stated that industry including power stations, motor vehicle, and open burning are the main contributor to the country's ever-growing emission. It was also mentioned that Malaysian CO2 emissions are mainly caused by transportation activities, which contribute to 97.1%. The increased number are seen as good for the economy as the consumer vehicle sales increase, but it certainly adds up to the total CO2 emission produced by road vehicle in Malaysia. Next is the lack of understanding. Besides the little exposure given by the government about the green and circular economy, in Malaysia, however, we don't have a circular economy yet. A similar thing that we have here is a reuse economy. You might be wondering, what is a reuse economy? So basically, when a corporation recycles but yet still absorb extra raw resources, this is referred to as a reuse economy. And there are some companies that still do not fully understand what this green and circular economy is. By moving toward the green economy, it is not only about sustainability or recycling. The companies need to implement a firm-oriented green innovation as well as customer-oriented green innovation. Besides, not only do the companies need to implement green practices in their firm, but they should also create awareness of the benefit of using green technology and its practices through employees to increase knowledge and to reduce the negative impact on the environment. The last issue is about the cost. There is no doubt that a green and circular economy is a bit more expensive than when using a linear economy. This is because some green technology require a much higher cost, such as if the company wants to change the environment entirely, which also means that they want to change from using traditional electricity production to using solar power. It may help the company to reduce the electrical and utilities bill later on, but the cost of installation of a solar panel can be really expensive. Another example that I could give here is the price increase. In some cases, switching to environmentally friendly material can be costly in the manufacturing process and elsewhere in the facilities. For example, furniture manufacturers who switch suppliers to buy only sustainable logging timber may pay higher prices for sawn timber. Higher costs must be passed on to the customer in the form of a higher price or borne by the company in the form of a lower rate of return on the product. Now, let's move on to the green economy policies, initiative and their effectiveness in Malaysia. Malaysia government has created a few policies to support the green economy in the country. One of them is Green Technology Policy. Green technology is the development and application of products, equipment, and systems to conserve the natural environment and resources, minimizing and reducing the negative impact of human activities. This policy has been promoted by the government in 2009 when they started to realize that Malaysia's economic growth slowed and it became evident that when compared with other developing countries, Malaysia was producing high level of carbon emission. According to the World Bank, in 2009, Malaysia recorded 6.53 metric tons of carbon emission per capita, which was higher than other developing countries such as Indonesia. The country only recorded 1.65 metric tons in the same year. A wave of green technology fueled both by private sector investment and intervention, and also incentives from the national government in the solar power industry. Other than that, to improve the green economy in Malaysia, the government also came up with another policy, which is the National Green Technology Policy. This policy also plays the role of an initial step to embrace green technology. It was launched by the Malaysian government on 24th July 2009. This policy has identified green technology as a key driver to accelerate the national economy and promote sustainable development. The main target of this policy is to provide a direction and motivation for Malaysians to continuously enjoy good quality living and a healthy environment through the reduction of the carbon footprint without compromising economic growth. This policy was built with 4 pillars, which are energy, environment, economy, and social. In addition, Malaysia's government was not only depending on those policies to improve the green economy in this country, but they also came up with numerous initiatives. Low Carbon City Framework is one of their initiatives that had been developed by the KITA, in collaboration with the Green Technology Malaysia and the Malaysian Institute of Planner from 2010 until 2011. This initiative has taken into consideration for the framework and assessment of the cities for their conversion as places that generate low carbon emission. This document can assist local authorities, developers, and city planners in the development of townships to reduce their emission. It is a system that measures the level of carbon emission based on performance criteria, such as urban environment, urban infrastructure, building, and also urban transportation. Another Malaysia initiative is Green Technology Financing Scheme, GTFS. The scheme was introduced in Malaysia in 2010 as a way to attract the industry sector in adopting environment-friendly operation and practices, as well as adopt the green technology approach in their innovation. According to Budget Speech 2010 announced in October 2009, for producers, the scheme was allocated to have 1.5 billion ringgit Malaysia for the producers and users of green technology. The maximum loan that can be provided is a 50 million ringgit Malaysia for producer and 10 million ringgit Malaysia for users company. A total of 76 projects with a total funding worth 1.016 billion ringgit Malaysia were offered funding from financial institutions involved. As a sign of commitment to creating an environment conducive to the development of green technology, the Malaysian government has extended the funding with an additional allocation of fund by 2 billion ringgit Malaysia. Of course, the government always expect to get good result from every initiative that they take. The only initiative that we can conclude as less effective is the low carbon city framework because it did not achieve the target, which is to reduce the level of carbon emission. The graph illustrates the weak effectiveness of the initiative. As we can see, in 2018, CO2 emission per capita for Malaysia were 6.53 metric ton. It shows that CO2 emission per capita of Malaysia have increased by 1.07 from 6.53 in 2009 to 7.60 in 2018. On the other hand, the Green Technology Financing Scheme shows a positive result when the demand for green financing in Malaysia had increased from 1.9 billion ringgit Malaysia in 2010 to 6.7 billion ringgit Malaysia in 2013. This trend shows that more producers have been joining the green technology sector. There are a few examples of green technology projects that have been successfully funded, such as solar farm, electric buses, green building, and a recycling mechanism for electrical and electronic waste.
There are many people, including economists, that seem to have a positive outlook on economic growth and environmental sustainability. They say that countries with more money actually pay more to keep their environment cleaner than countries with less money do. For instance, the countries that are spending large amounts of money on regulations and programs actually prove to be effective. Evidence of this fact is reflected by the EPI or the Environmental Performance Index. The graph shows EPI scores on the vertical axis and the GDP of countries on the horizontal axis. When EPI scores are combined with a country's GDP, the graph shows that countries with a higher GDP have a better EPI score. If we increase the GDP measurement from 1,000 to 10,000, there is a 20-point increase in EPI scores, which is drawn from the lines of best fit. If you want to compare Malaysia and Singapore, it is clearly that Singapore has better GDP and EPI than Malaysia. This is most probably because Singapore is richer, in which they can pull out more green initiatives than Malaysia. To be concluded, once a nation is wealthy enough, green initiative kick in. It shows that more developed and industrialized nations have a better EPI score.